The average New York City apartment building is a lot like a can of sardines. It's packed to the gills, needs a key to get into, and is absolutely disgusting when the juice from inside gets on your shirt. The sardines may have friendlier residents and a more pleasant odor, but sadly are missing the irony of packing people so close together and having the gall to call themselves apartments. It's not that I dislike the cities, I just have a hard time dealing with terrible traffic, incomprehensible parking laws, pretentious hipsters, mediocre murals, overrated food, a population density higher than Willie Nelson, and a smell that can only be described as icky. Essentially, I think of any US city the same way most US cities think about New Jersey. A terrible place that should only be visited in fire and brimstone sermons when the idea of hell isn't depressing enough. And with little more than a sheet of dollar store foam board and a tourniquet around the imaginary olfactory, these apartment buildings can be made cheaply and easily. Let's get into it. First things first, find a piece of chipboard or cardstock and cut out a 2" by 3" rectangle and draw a rectangle inside that rectangle and use it as a window stencil. Then grab a piece of dollar store foam board and cut out 4 6" by 9" walls. If you want a bigger building, just make sure that the horizontal and vertical measurements are multiples of the stencil's measurements. Then peel off the paper from each side of the foam board like it's your back after a day at the beach. After taking the prerequisite time to get that image out of your head, use the stencil to create a series of windows on the front of the building, flipping the stencil over to make a door. This way you can also prove your dad wrong because the doors and windows you make are pretty much the same. Cut the windows out with a box cutter. Making sure to save the scraps to throw on the floor in front of your wife when she yells at you for making a mess. Do this again for any other sides of the building that you'd like to have windows on, just making sure to vary up the pattern to keep things interesting. Next, buckle up and pitch a tent because your hand is going cramping. Measure and mark 1 centimeter spaces going vertically from one side of each wall before carving in the grooves with a ballpoint pen. It's not important whether or not you can see the mark, just that it's there, kinda like Santa Claus. Then mark 2 centimeter spaces and carve a line into every other layer of foam to emulate a brick pattern. And if your hand starts to hurt, just remember that all in all, Pink Floyd is pretty overrated. Once that section is done, toss on some deep purple and carve grooves into the alternating layers offset by a centimeter but still 2 centimeters apart. And just in case anyone was wondering, the only reason I'm using metric over the proper and correct freedom units is because an inch is too long of a measurement and fractions are hard. Once done, grab some coffee stir sticks and cut them to the width of the windows and glue them to the bottom half to create sills. Then use the offcuts from the stir sticks and glue together a small set of stairs to get into the building. Next, use the rest of that chipboard and some Eileen's tacky glue to create a backing for the windows so that you can keep Tom from tossing in those marshmallow chickens from Easter. Cut out a roof and floor, making sure both are roughly 6" by 6" before taking a tiny hot glue gun and feeding it one of those Mario mushrooms. Then grab the 4 walls and glue them together using a square to prop up the walls at a perfect right angle. Glue on the roof and floor before cutting some 1/2" wide strips to line the roof and glue them across the top with about half of the strip rising above the roof line. Then, using another dollop of tacky glue mixed with a tinkle of tap water, give the roof a thin coat of glue before raiding the kitchen and grabbing some underwhelming dairy and loading its sandy contents into an empty herb shaker to give the whole roof a nice even coat of sand. Let the sand dry completely and then give the whole piece a coat in Mod Podge mixed with Apple Barrel's black paint. This will make the whole piece more durable and give it a base coat. Then lay down an equal and opposite base coat using Apple Barrel's Granite Gray. This will give everything that chalky look as well as coloring the mortar in between the bricks. Then paint all the bricks with Apple Barrel's Barn Red because despite what it says on the bottle, it can also be used as brick red. And also despite what it says on the bottle, it doesn't taste like apples, it tastes like barn. Coat the roof and watered down pavement before going back over the top and bottom as well as the windowsills with another coat of Granite Gray. After that, paint the stairs we made from earlier. Carefully give the windows another coat of black mixed with just a little bit of water. Then, to fill up the empty space on the rest of the building, get out that collection of itty-bitty posters you took 2 hours formatting because Google Docs doesn't seem to play well with images imported from Google Images and toss a couple on. Lastly, add some graffiti. Just draw some bubble letters before outlining them in a different color. But be careful to use just letters, because if you end up drawing a mural of an African animal, you'll be doing giraffe-heedy. And if you draw lines to quantify numerical relationships, you'll be doing graph-heedy. And if you paint a picture of an open window, it might get a little cold, because then there'll be a draft-heedy. Listen for the sounds of your friends and family abandoning you because of how terrible that joke was, and then comment your own version of the joke so that we can all be alone together. Lastly, glue the stairs from earlier to the front of the building, and then if you're feeling squirrely, a few boards across the windows to keep out the riffraff before moving on to the outro. It's not that I don't like the cities. I just don't like paying more to live worse. I prefer the country, where the sour milk smell from the cities is replaced with the far-off aroma of various types of manure, where people fly down the dirt roads at Mach 12 while singing about sexy tractors, and people treat John Mellencamp's "I Was Born in a Small Town" as their national anthem, despite living 8 minutes from the nearest Walmart. Despite the fact that I'm taking shots at everyone, we know that every place has its problems. Each area of the world has its own distinct flavor of nonsense, and I suppose one of the aspects I love about wargames is the opportunity to build a small community. Because if we both like rolling dice, then it doesn't matter if you're city or country. It doesn't matter if you're suburban or super rural. It doesn't matter if you're a beach bum or hill folk, or even lake trash and hippies. As long as you like games and aren't a Disney adult, we can be friends. Have a good one. While lying in the grass next to the mausoleum, I'll sit and stew on the fact that I may just be a notch in your bedpost and you just a line in my script, but I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that if you notch your bedpost every time you tick up the old body count, then before long it'll look like that 4-poster's been fed through a wood chipper. And also by that time, I hope that we can all realize that no matter what team you're on, sleeping in helps nobody. Mid-2000s anthems aside, mausoleums are great for wargames and TTRPGs. A crypt in the middle of a graveyard may well have a picket sign held high saying "Zombies and Treasure Here." Most buildings tend to act as generic cover that amounts to little more than things to run around or hide behind, but a large tomb in the middle of a table can draw the eye while screaming, "Don't dead open inside." Let's get into it. First things first, grab a piece of foam board from the money store and cut out 2 3" by 3" and 2 3" by 6" rectangles. As a general rule, I like to build my buildings with 3" high floors because that way my buildings remain relatively consistent across builds, and it works with either 28" or 32mm scale. Once cut, peel off both sides of the outside layers of paper. Cut out another 3" by 6" rectangle to act as the floor of the mausoleum. Grab the tinfoil that was nestled snugly between your dinner and a cookie sheet and ball it up before rolling it into the foam to imprint a stone pattern on the outside of the tomb. Just be careful to vary up the pattern of rolling the tinfoil so that the pattern doesn't repeat. Next, cut a door-shaped hole in the entrance, lift it up about 3 widths of foam board off the ground. Finally, get fed up with a box cutter so dull it makes Catcher in the Rye look exciting, and trade it out for a better blade. Finish cutting out the door before finding a scrap piece of foam board and tracing a doorway on it. Trace an arch roughly 1/4 of an inch around the door and carve stones into it by drawing them with a pen. Hit it with the tinfoil and cut out the arch before continuing the rock pattern on the sides of the arch. Glue the stones over the doorway before gluing the walls to the floor while pondering the fact that in an actual mausoleum they lay the body out for roughly a year to rot before cleaning all the leftover tissue from the bones and putting those bones in a bone box called an ossuary, and putting that ossuary on the mausoleum shelves, making it go from a spooky tomb to a morbid file cabinet. Cut a few long thin strips out of a piece of chipboard as well as a square piece to act as a door. Set the chip door behind the arch and trace a silhouette of said oculus and glue the strips vertically to the door with spaces in between the strips roughly the size of the strips. Then glue some more strips horizontally along the door using the same spacing, and then glue the door behind the arch to create a recessed wrought iron door. Then bring back the foam from earlier and cut out 2 right triangles the same width as the building and exactly half the height, because if they were any shorter or taller they'd be wrong triangles. Play a little pinball with the tin ball before gluing them vertically to the short edge of the building. Cut and glue a staircase out of 3 layers of foam while pretending that you planned to do it that way and didn't just write it into the script after the fact. Bring back the chipboard and cut out 8 strips that are 6 inches long and 1 inch wide. On 4 of the strips, mark a line every inch along the strip and then do the same for the other 4, offsetting the mark by a half an inch. Draw another mark long ways across the strip just under the halfway point. Then using a scissors, cut out a small isosceles triangle with the midpoint being at zenith. I made the mistake of cutting out right triangles on the first set, meaning that not only do my shingles look a little weird, but also that my strips will be dry because there was no isosceles. Anyway, glue the shingles in 2 alternating and overlapping patterns before gluing them to the roof and cutting out one final strip to act as a ridge cap shingle and scoring it along the middle with the back of the razor to get a cleaner fold line. Find the bin of trash you've been saving for just this moment, finally justifying those pesky hoarding tendencies, and pull out some beads and buttons that will work as good decorations when glued to the side of the tomb. If you have some paint on primer, hit the greeble with it before base coating with the same thing we base coat with every night, Pinky: Mod Podge and black paint. While base coating, pick a name for the skeleton that will inevitably haunt this grave before narrowing it down to Boney Shalhoub, Pasta Rigaboni, or Andrew Keening. Once the Mod Podge is dry, give the piece a quick coat in Apple Barrel's black, watered down just a bit before taking it to go see Fast Times at Ridgemont dry, and painting the roof lightly with Apple Barrel's Arbor Green. Then, using pewter gray, give the walls a dry brush while avoiding the greeble, before dry brushing said greeble with Folk Arts Gunmetal Gray and checking to see if avoiding the greeble is free to use as a name for my rock band. Mix some granite gray with the remains of the arbor green to create a beautiful minty mixture that works great for dry brushing the roof and terribly for freshening your breath. Try to think of a pointless question to ask the audience to farm engagement while dry brushing the walls with uncut granite gray and the greeble with Folk Arts Antique Copper, and then move on to the outro while wondering aloud, what do you think is a good name for a skeleton? The fact that time comes for us all has been expressed in many different ways by many different cultures. Whether it be an old man holding a scythe and an hourglass, an alligator maniacally tick-tocking after swallowing a clock, or a band coming onto the scene in 2003, releasing 4 banger albums, going on hiatus, and then reuniting to make 4 more okay albums, and no matter which set of 4 you like, you'll always be able to say either I like old Fall Out Boy or I like Fall Out Boy old. Fighting skeletons and zombies in a graveyard isn't emotionally gripping just because you saw the Argonauts do it 62 years ago, or because your watch says that it's terror time again. It's emotionally stirring because you're going to a place of corruption and rot and beating back the inevitable tide of death itself, like changing the channel on the TV after it was left on C-SPAN. Have a good one. Farmer Brown, Farmer White, Farmer Orange, and Farmer Pink were having a fascinating conversation about planting a new crop with larger equipment before discussing the merits of cow tipping. All the while, some bald guy was clobbering on about finding an old almanac, and Farmer Blonde was dancing around and maliciously shucking an ear of corn. Barnyard-themed satires aside, farms aren't that great for wargames. I think a shootout at a Western corral would be an amazing setting, but when I tell people about it, they'd say, it's okay. But with little more than some dollar store foam, a few pieces of chipboard, and a giant toilet paper roll, you too can make a barn to house your single dove and a silo to store all those corny jokes for the winter. Let's get into it. First things first, buy a piece of foam board from that store that sells stale food and cut out a 6" by 6" square. Cut out the silhouette of the barn, keeping in mind that most animal apartments have a roof that is steeper on the sides and flatter at the top. Cut out 2 3x7 rectangles for the sides of the building before cutting a door and the windows and peeling the paper off of the foam. Using a cheap pen, carve horizontal lines every ½ inch along the 4 walls to emulate wood planks. Use the wire brush stolen out of your dad's golf bag to give the planks a grainy texture. Glue some thin strips of chipboard or cereal box to the barn door to make the diagonal bracers barn doors are known for. Glue the door back to the barn so that it's slightly sticking out to give the piece a more 3-dimensional look. Glue the 4 walls together on a 6" by 7" base before blocking off the windows with a few more pieces of chipboard. Then using the same chipboard, cut a small to medium pile of 1" wide strips that are 7½ inches long. Next, use a pair of flush cutters to nip out small V's at 1" increments going about halfway up the strip. These can be done 3 or 4 at a time depending on how strong your nippers are. Glue the strips on top of one another, flipping the strip every other layer to create overlapping shingles. Glue each sheet of shingles to the side of the barn before cutting out one last strip to act as a ridge cap shingle. Set the barn aside before bringing out the cardboard tube of a roll of industrial plastic wrap or a can of Pringles. Cut the tube to the height you'd like your silo, using a coping saw to help you deal with all your problems, or a hacksaw if you're trying to guess my next joke. I'm turning this silo into a dice tower because while building it, my wife had the idea. And like all her ideas, they mean more work for me, but this time just to shake things up, she had a good one. To make the dice tower, cut a door at the bottom of the tube before cutting a circle out of a piece of foam and shaping it to channel the dice out of the tube. Cut 2 more half circles before mentioning there's an in-depth video on dice towers in the description and covering the foam with a layer of Mod Podge mixed with black paint. Set those aside to dry and bring out a fresh piece of chipboard. Use the back of an X-Acto knife to score horizontal lines 1 inch apart. Gently crease the scored lines and repeat this process, scoring vertical lines 1/2 inch apart. Glue in the dried foam wedges to create the dice tower ledges and wrap the silo in the scored chipboard that will mimic the concrete blocks that'll knock off your socks. Consider quitting YouTube to become a rapper and glue a bamboo skewer to the side of the silo to cover up that seam and act as a tube that you see on the outside of a silo. Find a pattern for a flat hemisphere by googling flat hemisphere pattern. When printing the hemisphere, the width of the picture should be half the circumference of the cylinder you're using. To find the circumference of a circle, use the formula pi r squared. And for those of you that pushed up your glasses and said actually the formula for a circle is 2 pi r, go play with your calculator, dork. And for those of you that said pies aren't square, they're round, we can be friends. Cut out the pattern, trace the pattern on some chipboard, and cut the pattern out again while wondering whether or not you should be listening to the Red Hot Chili Peppers while you do. Gently fold in the wings and glue them together using a chipboard patch in the middle. Glue the newly made dome to the top of the silo and cover the seams with some small stripboard chips. Put that away, grab some coffee stir sticks, and use the stir sticks to make small 2-bar fences 1 inch tall and 3 inches long. Use a piece of clear plastic from an old Hot Wheels box and cut small rectangles to act as bases for the fences. Once done, bring back the Mod Podge and black paint mixture and fully coat both the farm and silo, making sure to get into the grain of the wood. Let dry and base coat using watered down burnt umber, giving the fences a light stain in the mixture as well. Then using a mixture of Apple Barrel's aged parchment, pewter gray, and that toasty umber, base coat the sides of the silo and hit the top with Folk Art's gunmetal gray. Make an honest woman out of your favorite paint pot by finally using it for its intended purpose. Coat the shingles with Apple Barrel's pavement and dry brush the sides of the silo with light mocha and the top with Folk Art's sterling silver. Finally, coat the entire barn with a dry brush of pewter gray, paint the door with aged parchment, and the windows with black before moving on to the outro. My wife once asked me why I call my notebook my silo, to which I replied it's where I store my corny jokes. And after finishing this project, I think a farm would be a good place for a tabletop game. Whether it be protecting the economic cornerstone of a small town, investigating a spooky occurrence in a secluded barn, or gearing up for an utterly devastating cow mando raid, farm is where things happen. Whether it be Farmer Brown or Old MacDonald, Mr. Green Jeans or the Jolly Green Giant, they're all wondering why that farmer in the small wooded valley keeps trying to set fire to the rain. Just remember that while I sit here playing with my toys and trying to farm engagement and watch time, there are farmers working their butts off, literally summoning our food or the food our food eats out of the ground. So next time you see a farmer or a guy in a straw hat and overalls, make sure to give him a big hug and whisper thank you lovingly in his ear. Have a good one. At 3 in the morning, when the house is quiet and the night is still, the phone ringing will cut through a peaceful slumber like a hot knife through butter, and those that are brave or foolish enough to answer the call will find that Gondor is calling for aid. Even through the groggy fog of sleepiness, every man's heart will stir at the call to adventure, and they'll ask, is this the hero that can save us? And the only proper answer is a stalwart and resolve, no, this is Patrick. Novelty is a fickle mistress, always calling for things that are new and exciting just to turn around and faint with boredom and start the process anew. And despite the fact that I'm just susceptible to the siren song of novelty as anyone and can fall prey to the shiny and new, today is not that day. This day, we say out with the new and in with the old and look back to the halcyon days of 2003 into the back of the Lord of the Rings Battle Game magazine, issue number 9, and follow along with that issue's modeling workshop to make one of Gondor's beacons. Let's get into it. First things first, find an old pizza box or other piece of cardboard garbage, cut off the unusable flaps, and cut out 8 3-inch by 3-inch squares and a few long 2-inch strips, all while wondering whether or not cardboard garbage would be a good name for a rock band. Grab your guitar and book a manager before gluing the 4 cardboard squares onto 4 other cardboard squares, rotating the squares so that the corrugates are facing the opposite orientation. Find a way to say squares one more time before gluing the squares into a cube and set aside before cutting the strips into 2 3-inch sections, 2 2.5-inch sections, 2 2s, 2 2.5s, and 2 1-inch segments. Glue the matching segments one on top of another in order of descending length to make a set of steps before realizing that it's far too short and you'll have to make another set of strips using the greasy side of the pizza box. Bring back the cube and cut out a top before covering the seams with either masking tape or blue painter's tape before doing the exact same with the steps, taping off all but the side that'll be glued to the cube. Do the same with the other set of steps and glue them to the cube to create an L-shaped staircase. Attach another strip to the bottom of the second level staircase to create the corner platform and cut out 3 more 3-inch strips to create a small rail on the outside of the beacon because it looks aesthetically pleasing and adheres to medieval OSHA standards. Cover and tape any more gaps before going through the garbage to find a box from Target's disappointing snacks section and slice out 6 half-inch strips and use a scissors to cut those into 1-inch by half-inch rectangles before gluing them to the side of the beacon in random spots to look like brickwork poking through. Then grab a carton of plaster of Paris and mix up a serving or two per the carton's instructions, waiting for it to be renamed Plaster of America. A spackle or gap filler can also work if that's what you prefer. Find the most pretentious paintbrush you own and use it to paint the plaster onto the model to give it a stone texture. If you can't decide what paintbrush to use, find the one wearing a beret and bragging about having the best food despite being neighbors with Italy. Once the plaster is dry, cover with a layer of Mod Podge and black paint for durability and to act as a base coat. Then use a mix of Apple Barrel's black and pewter gray for a secondary base coat, brushing lightly enough so that the deep recesses stay black, stay strong, stay black and long. Add Apple Barrel's white to the mixture and dry brush the piece to pick out most of the raised edges, and finish with another light dry brush of just white to lighten up the edges, stairs, and railings. To build the pyre, grab a small fistful of tongue depressors and use a scissors to cut off the ends and split them down the middle. Then, using Apple Barrel's chocolate bar or burnt umber, mix about 2 to 3 parts water with 1 part paint and use that mixture to darken the wood, giving it a rougher and more natural look. Let that dry and grab an LED tea candle and slowly build a large pyre in the log cabin style around the candle, making sure to leave a little bit of room in case it needs to be changed out. Then cut off an inch-long section of drinking straw and find a dowel slightly larger than the straw and carve it so that it fits in easily, all while making sure that your camera is focused on the tea candle and not what's in front of it. Cut the dowel roughly 3 inches long and continue building the pyre in the teepee style to make things a little tense. While building the second layer of the pyre, keep the straw in the center and build the wood around it. Lastly, find a piece of that white fabric Grandma puts under her Christmas houses, or pick some of the fluff out of your wife's favorite quilt and glue it around the dowel, making it look like billowing smoke by gently brushing the middle of the fluff with gray and the top with black, and then moving on to the outro. When I do finally get around to returning Gondor's call, I'm going to ask them one simple question. Where'd all your doors go? And with the silence approaching uncomfortability hanging in the air, I expect to hear nothing less than, they took the doors to Mordor and they're taking the hobbits to Isengard. But no matter who has the most doors, we can all agree on one thing. If Tom Bombadil was that important, he would have been in the movie. Now, while I appreciate the sound of the nerds collectively hyperventilating while trying to regain enough composure to type out an encyclopedia-length screed on why I'm wrong, we should all take a moment to appreciate an older way of doing things. A time when Peter Jackson was willing to make 7 miles of chainmail and we didn't have to look at Evangeline Lilly's disturbingly bad hairline. A time when wargamers would dig through garbage because they needed building materials and knew their place. Now everybody is 3D printing and terrified that some guy named Al is going to take over. And despite the fact that one day he may take over, today is not this day. Have a good one. The 3 little orcs finally decided to gork out on their own and make something of themselves. The first little orc made a barricade that offered concealment. The second little orc made a barricade that offered cover. The third little orc decided to morph with that and crump the other two orcs, taking not only their cribs but also a handful of teeth. Badly rethemed children's stories aside, I started out this project planning to build a shantytown. Then, after realizing that a shantytown wasn't a place to sing sailing songs without getting seasick, I was so bummed that I decided to go to Hooverville and go shopping for a new vacuum. Now, insensitive misapprehensions about poverty-stricken domiciles crossed with nautical ditties aside, orcish barricades are extremely simple to make and all of the materials can be obtained cheaply and easily. Let's get into it. First things first, find a piece of chipboard or the side of a cereal box, then, using a ruler, mark and cut lines every ½ centimeter or 3/8 inch if you're not lame. Once those are cut, get out your first or second favorite hot glue gun and glue the strips so that one is standing up vertically in the middle of one lying down and one is sandwiched on top of the other, making an I-beam or girder. This will help hold up and support your ramshackle barricades, but if you'd like help holding up your socks instead, take the girder, change the I to an A, exchange the cereal box for lace, and call me in the morning. Once done, find some corrugated cardboard and start cutting out rough squares somewhere between 1 or 2 inches. Corrugated cardboard can be bought pretty cheaply, but if you don't want to wait for shipping, the insert to a Domino's pan pizza box can also be used, as detailed in my video on shipping containers with the link in the description. Then, cut some similar squares as well as some thin strips out of that chipboard from earlier. Lastly, cut some flotsam and or jetsam out of a square of cross-stitching mesh or granny grating as it's referred to in the common tongue. Now that a proper mess has been made, cut the girders to roughly 3 inches and start gluing the previously cut squares to the girders in different orientations, either making a small barricade or a traditional L-shaped structure wargames are famous for. Lastly, to conclude construction, trace a base on your box of grape nuts and attach the structure to it before gluing a couple more pieces of debris to the ground near the structure. The nice thing about these lead lean-tos is whether they were built by orc boys, war boys, lost boys, or soldier boys, the more they look like they were built shoddily and in a hurry with stolen parts, the closer they look to reality, like the mansion of a one-eyed war boss or the obviously criminal line of soldier gaming consoles. Obscure gaming scams aside, the third structure is being built as normal, but like every conversational contribution made by my dog, I'll be adding a roof. The best way to do this is to notch your girder like you're tallying the amount of construction workers with bad balance, and then add a third support girder and check to make sure it can support a miniature with a wide base. Then, in an attempt to save yourself an hour of editing and setting up a short you'll be releasing next week or so, simply speed through the construction of a large building roughly 6 by 6 and mostly enclosed so that you won't have to paint the inside, while realizing that you've only used up about 0.5% of that corrugated cardboard that you stole out of the trash at work. Then, while forgetting to roll up your sleeves, grab your extra bits and offcuts and start gluing them in a pile on another piece of chipboard to create a bit of impassable terrain or dangerous terrain if your preferred game has a roll for tetanus mechanic. Then, pick what feels like the coldest day of the year but in reality is only -8 to bring your new toys outside and lightly base coat with a flat black primer before going inside and making sure to inform your entire household that it is in fact cold out there. After going back inside and thawing your fingers and giving the primer the requisite hour to dry, mix some Eileen's tacky glue with a few drops of water and isopropyl alcohol to thin it out and cut down the surface tension. Next, using cream cheese's older, lamer brother, thinly spread the glue on each base before covering in an equally thin layer of construction sand. If you don't have access to construction sand, find a friend with an expensive aquarium and grab some of the stuff used to cover the floor. Then, when you come up with nothing more than a fistful of neon rocks and fish poop, remember that you can't always trust a disembodied voice on the internet, and you probably should have introduced yourself to that guy you share an apartment wall with before ruining his fish tank. After giving the sand some time to dry, brush everything except the sand with a thin layer of Folk Arts Gunmetal Gray using a makeup brush that you bought from the local Walgreens because your wife started locking hers up like the local Walgreens. Then coat all the girders in Apple Barrel's Barn Red to emulate the thin layer of rust-colored iron oxide used as an anti-corrosive coating, while pretending that your channel isn't simply nonsense because you googled a question a child would ask about construction materials. Pick out a few panels to paint a different color. I'm using English Ivy Green to make it look like whoever built this ripped some panels off a piece of machinery they found lying around. Afterward, lightly dry brush everything with Folk Arts Antique Copper for a simple rusty look on everything except the rust-resistant girders. Use a mix of Apple Barrel's light mocha and watered down burnt umber as a dirt flicked onto each piece with an old or current toothbrush. Stain all the sand with the watered down burnt umber before allowing to dry and accenting with a dry brush from the light mocha from earlier. Next, using a warm off-white like aged parchment, dry brush all the structures, adding a weathered and lightly sand-blown look. Lastly, before moving into the outro, grab your homemade flock from 5 months ago and give your barren wastes a small amount of flora to make the violent destruction of the fauna more festive. When nothing else is available, sometimes cover and concealment need to be improvised with everyday objects. And while the improv may impress Ryan Stiles and Colin Mockery, the real person you want to impress is Sun Tzu by planting a tactical advantage on the battlefield beforehand. But if you hear Sun Tzu and your first thought is Sun Hu, then victory is sure to Sun Shu, and the glory that you Sun knew will turn your reputation to Shun Pu like the Mulanic tale of Shan Yu. Ancient philosophers, Hun leaders, and warrior poets aside, you don't need to hold someone over a volcano to know who they'll react under pressure. When the lead starts to fly, if they take cover, they're a reasonable person. If they laugh and charge, they're an orc. But if they start singing one of the most inspiring songs of a decade, then you, sir, have found yourself Queen and David Bowie. Have a good one.